Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 239. Joining me today are Kurt and Denette Schaer, who we met when they attended a recent While We're Waiting weekend in Arkansas. They are the parents of 3 sons, including Logan, a young man with a knack for making others feel seen and a deep desire to point people to Jesus. In May of 2022, just a few days after his high school graduation, Logan and a passenger died after he drove his car into a pond, leaving the Schaers with a multitude of unanswered questions. Central to their journey has been their deep faith in God, which has enabled them to come to peace with not having all the answers. Lean in and be encouraged. Hi, Kurt and Denette. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Absolutely. It is an honor to be here, and we are thrilled. So thank you for having us.
Yes, we are so honored. Very, very honored.
Well, good. I have been looking forward to visiting with you. Let's get started by just giving you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourselves. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
Yeah, we actually are Kurt and Denette Schaer. We live in Wesley Chapel, Florida, which is near Tampa, Florida. We always tell people Tampa because no one knows where Wesley Chapel is. But we actually are both born and raised in Florida, which is pretty uncommon. Most of our neighbors and people that we meet are all transplants to Florida, but we both actually were raised right here and met in high school and are both Floridians at heart through and through.
Yeah, we did meet in high school. She was the starting pitcher for the softball team, and I was the starting pitcher for the baseball team. So it was kind of like this match made in heaven.
Oh, boy.
Literally.
Yeah.
Meant to be, for sure.
Yes,
Exactly.
We've made it through a couple crazy storms this year. It's been a crazy hurricane season, but we are here with roof repairs and all. So.
Yeah, we have a beautiful family. We have 3 boys, and Dylan and Nathan are our oldest ones. Both of those are married, and then Logan obviously was our youngest one. One's a firefighter. One has his own lawn care business, and so we're just a family that's doing it. I've been a pastor for a lot of years, and so we've been a family that just grew up doing a lot of stuff together. We enjoy each other very well, and I don't know, love the beach, love cruising, right?
We do
Hobbies
love
is our thing. Out of Florida, you have to cruise, so cruising is what we do for our hobbies.
We love to cruise. Yeah,
nice.
Can that be a hobby? I don't know if that's a hobby.
I don't know. I think
that would be a good
career.
one. That would be a good one. That would be a good one.
Yeah. Exactly. I've never been on a cruise. That is something we have never done.
Listen.
So we may have to give that a try one day.
Yes.
You have to. We love it.
You could literally come 30 minutes from the house. We can leave out of the port of Tampa. It'd be great. 5 days. Wonderful.
There we go.
You got to do it.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, I know a lot of people who do enjoy cruising, and apparently it's kind of addictive. Once you start, it's hard to stop. So
that's so fun. That's literally what they told us when we took our first one. Oh, this is your first cruise. Oh, trust me, you'll go on. I'm like, we'll see. I could go on 3 a year. And I mean, it is unbelievable. Yeah.
We just love to disconnect and get away. And, it's beautiful. It's warm. So we just love it. Yeah, we love it.
Well, sounds great. Sounds great. Well, we're here today to talk about Logan and a little bit about his story. But before we get into that, I would really like to hear a little bit of your personal testimony and your history as a couple, because I know you have a lot to share in that regard.
So I actually, I was saved at a very young age. I was about 5 years old. My family life at the time was very tumultuous. There was a lot of partying, a lot of just outside influences that my parents were really struggling with their faith. And so we would go to church on Sundays, and yet the rest of the week was just not a very safe environment. And so at the age of 5 years old, I gave my heart to Christ. Honestly, was trying to find a place of refuge and safety, something that felt stable. And I've stayed pretty consistent all throughout, just pursuing him, whether it was, through different mentors. Went on my first missions trip at age 14, thought that I'd be a missionary in some faraway country. And, I just had all these dreams and visions of what living a life for Christ looked like. And so that it actually is probably harder than I imagined, even though I think the big picture in the sky of being this far off missionary was this beautiful picture, but I had no idea what God had in store for me. We actually met when we were in high school and fell in love, which we kind of already shared just a little bit, but had very different walks of faith. And I'll let him share parts of that
my story was crazy. I too grew up in church, but I grew up in a very legalistic, cultish type community, if you will. So I really didn't know like this loving relationship. And then I got older and we were still going there, and I started dating a girl that was a Baptist, and they kicked my family out of the church because of it. I mean, it was that type of, hey, tell your son to break that off or y'all got to leave. And so overnight, so it really was just like this weird thing. A few years earlier, I had found out that my biological father had left me. And so the dad that raised me wasn't really my dad. So take that on coupled with this getting kicked out of the church. I just had this weird anger, abandonment, church's weird kind of thing. I know there's this cute girl at church, so I'll go there because she's there. But like, I don't know that I really want this whole God thing because it seems really, really awkward. It didn't seem like where it was safe for her, it was not safe for me. I mean, it cost us everything. So it's kind of like, it's just a weird vibe. We meet in high school and we're doing our thing. And she does have dreams to become this missionary. And at our school, I transferred to a private school to play baseball. And at our school, I always say it like she was that girl. Like this is Denette Schaer or Denette Klaus. And man, she's going to be a missionary, and she leads all the groups, and she's the one you want your daughter to be like. And then she's dating this dude, Kurt. What the heck just happened? You know what I mean? We got married early. 7 months after she graduated high school, we got married, and we started doing life. And I'm a complete train wreck, Jill. I mean, it was all my decisions were selfish and prideful and arrogant. And so the first 8 years of our marriage was like this massive chasm between what she grew up her whole life in and the brokenness I had. So there's moral failure, adultery, verbal and emotional abuse, just like this whole thing. In the last 2 years of that, 2006, I'm playing cards for a living. It's kind of what I do every day. I go to the casino and play poker, and I'm walking out the door to go play that day, and I take a phone call, and it causes me to stop in my tracks. And the phone call got disconnected. When it got disconnected, anger welled so much in me that I just threw my phone across the room. I was so angry. And when my phone hit the other side, for some reason, I fell to my knees. I don't know what it was and why it even happened, but I fell to my knees. And I just, at that moment, gave my heart and life to the Lord and really confessed to him that, if he would so see it to save me, a sinner like me, that I would spend the rest of my life talking about him. And stood up to her, looked at her, and was like, I got to go to Bible college. And she went, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know. I just gave my heart to the Lord, and he loves me, and I got to spend the rest of my life talking about him. And that day started the craziest journey of our lives. And that's the way it's been for the last nearly 20 years. He's put us in some crazy situations, but it was this moment completely different from hers where she felt this safety, and this is where the Lord is. Mine was just birthed out of, wow, I have run from you for my entire life, and I am a broken, wretched sinner.
Yeah. He came from a really broken place. And I like to say often that, I've been married one time, but to two different men, because the first 8 years of our marriage were very hard. And there was a point in time when I looked at him and I said, I believe that God told me you were going to be an amazing man of God. I just don't know that I'm going to be here to see it, because our marriage was so broken and our family was so broken. And thank God our boys were young enough that they really only remember the dad that they have now. Our oldest was about to turn 6 years old when he gave his heart to Christ. And so I'm sure he has some memories of some of the brokenness and stuff. And obviously we haven't been perfect past that point, but I'm just so thankful that God allowed our boys to see a whole healed father, because he really was a great father and is a great father to our boys. So So it's a miracle of a story. It's a miracle of a story.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. What a testimony. And, you can really use your story to help others. And I know we'll talk about that, a little bit later in the podcast. And I love that God has redeemed your marriage and is doing beautiful things through it. So we'll get into that a little bit more later.
Redeemed is like my word though, because I love that word because redeemed and restored. I mean, I literally at one point was going to like name a company that redeemed and restored because when you've lived in the gut of your whole life and you know that there's a father who would love you and then chooses to use you, there's nothing like it. It's crazy.
Yeah. What a gift. All right. So what I'd like to hear now though is about Logan. Take a few minutes and tell us about him. Help us get to know him a little bit.
Oh, I'll let you start because I probably need to grab my tissues already.
I'm not sure what a few minutes is, but I'll bet it's not enough of minutes.
That's right. It's never enough time to talk about our kids.
No, there is not. Yeah, Logan was super special. He was the youngest of three boys. When he was born really some medical issues. Honestly, had a lot of allergies. Like went and did the 42 prick or 44 prick thing, and I think 41 of them shot up. I mean, it was like the man was allergic to everything but air. And it really stunted his growth. He was very little. So I remember at like the age of 6, people would be like, "Oh, how old are you, 2 or 3?" And he'd be like, "I'm 6." And like it really was a thing mentally. He hated that he was so tiny.
Sure.
But what it did in Logan was it birthed this personality that I may be little in size, but I'm going to be large in personality. And so he was just, he was the cream of the crop, man. He'd walk into rooms and just own rooms. They'd love this little dude. Like, who's walking in here like a little man and just owning this whole room? And so being youth pastors, he would go to summer camps with us, and winter camps. And so he just grew up in this lifestyle of like, I'm older than what I look in my personality and the way I act and the way I think. And so just became this real like persona to be around. Was extremely athletic, loved to do all the things. And I'll just remember one year he woke up one morning and he was like, "Hey, I want a donut." And I remember like his parents, we were like, "Buddy, you're gluten free. You can't have any of that. What are you talking about? You can't have no donut." He's like, "No, God healed me last night." And now we're two, I'm a pastor and she lived her whole life. And we too pray for healing. And we looked at each other and we're like, I don't know what we say to this.
That's scary. Yeah.
Okay, I guess go get a donut. And sure enough, Jill, from that moment on, he was healed. And not only did God heal him of that issue, but then in the healing, God began to give him the size that he desired. Mm-hmm. So now we watched our little man like grow into stature as well. So by the time the accident happened, he was as tall as me. But what it did was this personality that he had coupled with this stature now that grew in size. Mm-hmm. He was a force. He loved the Lord. Yeah. And man, just lived his life in such a way that no matter what age you were or where you were at in life, he wanted you to know like, man, there's hope. There's joy. I was a men's pastor, and for one of the assignments I had, I was a men's pastor, and I remember one men's breakfast we had to go in at like 5 and flip pancakes. At this point, Logan's like probably 7 or 8, maybe 9.
Yeah, he was definitely like a little Kurt. So wherever Dad wanted to do, he was there. Yeah, so he would serve and wanted to be a part of anything that his dad was a part of, but.
Yeah, so he tells me, he's like, "Hey, you going tomorrow to men's breakfast?" Yeah, I got to go to men's breakfast. Okay, I want to go. I'm like, "Oh, buddy, I'm going like at 5 when we're cooking the pancakes." He's like, "Hey, I want to go." Okay, I'll wake you up. So I woke up and I'll never forget this picture of the kitchen of the church we're at and this older gentleman frying bacon, my son in the middle flipping pancakes on this little burner standing on a chair, and this older gentleman flipping pancakes next to him. And afterwards, at breakfast, Carl was like my son's buddy. Carl comes up and he's like, "Man, that little guy of yours, man, I got to hang around him more." And this guy's like an 80-year-old war veteran, but he was just in that moment. And that's the atmosphere he created when you were in his presence. He wanted you to leave different. He wanted you to leave encouraged. loved, and it didn't matter if you were 6 or if you were 86, you were going to get the same treatment.
Yeah, I think one of our favorite attributes of his is definitely that he carried so much of the presence of God. He carried so much joy that he did want to make sure you felt seen. And
Mm.
so, wherever he was, there was one day specifically that I remember we were shopping at Walmart. It wasn't even church, and him and my middle son Nathan were shopping with me, and they were being silly and goofy, and they were kind of driving me a little crazy, as boys do sometimes, and they were just really hyper and energetic. And he was probably I don't know, 11 or 12 at the time. Nathan would have been 15 or 16. And we're checking out, and the boys were kind of hanging on me. And the cashier said, "Man, what I would give for a hug like that." And both boys ran around to the cashier and gave her the biggest hug. And so, well, you don't have to want one; you can have one. And that's just who really all three of our boys were, but especially Logan. He would make sure that you felt loved. And if he
Mm.
felt like you weren't, he was going to go out of his way to make sure that
To
you
make
knew.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, then that is a special gift in a person, especially a young man like that.
it is.
And honestly, Joe, that's so many people. That's what they used to tell us. Like, I can't believe your teenager is this polite, this communicative, cares this much to ask these kind of questions. But he knew from early on. He had gone to a church camp, and man, they had really empowered him and encouraged him and spoke words over him that he was going to be a preacher one day. And so he just knew in his heart. He was going to Bible college. That was where the road was headed. So all along, it just kind of, he picked up at like that 12, 13, 14 years old. Man, this is what it looks like. And I'm just going to love people and serve people and point them to Jesus. That's all I know to do. It was crazy. So a lot of people used to
Mm.
do that.
Yeah, that's special. That's a special gift that he had. So, talk about what happened in May of 2022.
So that day we had it was Memorial Day, and so Kurt and I had hung out by the pool that day, and we're just relaxing as you do in Florida. And our kids all had different events they were going to and different things, and we were just like, man, we just want to rest and relax. And so Logan and his girlfriend had gone to the beach that day with a group of friends, and he texted, I want to say around 3:30 or 4, said, "Hey, Mom, we're exhausted. I think we're just going to come back to the house and watch a movie. Is that okay?" I said, "Sure." So it actually made my heart happy because I knew he was going to be home and safe. And when they're all hanging out at the beach with teenagers, you are a little concerned about where they are and what they're doing. And so they came home and watched a movie, and he had his head on my shoulder, and his girlfriend had her head on his. And about 9:45, she got a message from her family that had been traveling that weekend out of town. They said, "Hey, we really would like for you to come home. We haven't seen you all weekend." So they packed up. He said, "Bye, Mom," and he left to drive her home. And that was the last time we got to see him.
Yeah, he left, and I was in my office doing some work, and about 15 minutes later, Denette came in. And she just, something's not right. And I said, "Oh, come on. He just left." No, he's not answering his text. Well, he's not supposed to be texting and driving. No, he wouldn't do that. Do you mind just driving it? So I'm like, yeah, I'll go drive. So I drove the way that he would have driven all the way to her house. And sure enough, the vehicle wasn't anywhere there. So I went back, I drove all the way back home, got her, and I said, "Something's not right. And I don't know what it is, but I want you to come with me." So she loaded up, and we drove back to the last known spot that we had on the family app. We could see everybody, and it showed at this pond, and we were like, "Well, he's not here. We're sitting here, so I don't exactly know what this means, but we'll just wait." And so we started making phone calls and praying. Praying the paint off the walls.
Mm.
Finally, it was at the point now where it had been long enough that it was like, okay, we need to call the police because something's not right. I don't feel good about this. It's weird. We had gone and gotten her parents at that point. They too were looking. Their ping, they had their daughter pinged somewhere else. Our ping was here. Their ping was there. They're getting frantic. So we call the police. The police come, and I'll never forget, two officers came up at first, and they just start doing what they do. They're asking all the right questions, and then they just start walking. And at one point, they said, "Hey, we're going to call in a couple other people. We see something right here in the grass, just doesn't look right." I went and looked at it, and I could see it, but I'm like, I don't know what that means, but okay. Well, then about 6, 7, 8 more squad cars come pulling up. Then an ambulance and a paramedic pulled up, and now it's been hours that we've been out here. The chaplain shows up, and then the dive unit for the police show up, and it's just a chaotic scene of what's happening. And about 1 a.m, the chaplain comes over and tells us that they had found the vehicle, and it's in the bottom of that pond, and that both of our babies are in it. And so that night, 7 Schaers went to a pond, and 6 came home. So we had to load up and come back to our house, and then try just to figure out what in the world just happened and what in the world's going to happen. I mean, it was just so chaotic, and that 3 hours leading up to it, not the scene and everything about it is so chaotic. I remember at one point just like standing off to the side, just like hollering, because now they got steps towing there. They've got the dive team. Like I don't, no one's told me anything, but I'm smart enough to know I see what's happening, and they're not doing all this because they just think, And I remember just staring at the sky and begging. Unfortunately, that night we've had a lot of prayers answered, but not that one.
Yeah.
And I knew we could, man. I knew we could. And what a story it would be. What a story. But it wasn't our story, so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was very difficult. There was nothing that could have prepared us for that. So, we had just had a graduation party for him. He had graduated the Thursday prior to that Monday. And Saturday we had all of his best friends and, mentors and family here to celebrate. And so we had to walk back into our home with a house that was fully decorated for graduation and with pictures of him literally everywhere.
They're everywhere normally.
They
They were exponentially this weekend.
Yeah, sure. It was and is still very, very hard. And
it just didn't make, a lot of it was just, it's like, one, just a trauma of what in the world just happened. But it also didn't make sense in our minds at the time, because it's like, come on now, we've committed our whole lives to you. We've given up everything to serve you. And man, this man's on his way to Bible college to preach the gospel. Like, what? This is not the way it's supposed to go for people like us. It doesn't happen like this, And it was just all of these crazy things, and then detectives, and they have to run their, they got to do all their investigations. So the next morning I'm answering questions. It's like, what in the world are you asking me these questions? This is crazy, And then just doing the things that no parent should have to do that you never plan on doing. So it was crazy.
And unfortunately, our loss is multiplied by there being 2 losses, and
Sure.
and knowing how hard that is for another family as well. And we can't take that pain away. We would if we could, and so that's very difficult. It's extremely difficult, knowing that your family, your son, had a part in also causing someone else's greatest loss, and so. And we don't know the why, and we don't know the answers to those questions that we won't know this side of heaven, and that's hard. Yeah. That's hard. And God's heard all the questions for sure. So that's hard.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure you've had a lot of questions for him.
Oh yeah.
You shared at the retreat, Kurt, that up until that point, you always had all the right answers for people. And as a pastor, that's, kind of, in quotes here, your job. What about after that point?
Well, even the way you just said that, I don't I don't know that I really had a lot of the right answers, honestly, because I didn't know until I had to walk it. But yeah, I think in my not knowing, in my ignorance to that depth of grief, what I did know is God's word. And sure, we know that is the source, and that is the hope that we find. Got all of that. I understand it, and I mean that's what carries me today. But I think a lot of times I said that flippantly sometimes in people's darkest situations. You know those 8 verses that go on every grieving card, and so it's like, okay, well, let's just hang on to that. And I don't think Psalms 23 that as you walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I don't know that I ever really had to get in that type of depth. And so my answers and my responses didn't come from that type of death. It came from maybe my hardest time, and that was nothing compared to someone's divorce or loss of a family of loved one, or whatever that darkest moment is. And so I think now what I've learned is presence is the most powerful thing that you can give someone. And so I've learned that sometimes it's not the words that roll off my lips, but it's the presence of sitting, listening, and then responding with love. And really, I don't know that there's 8 things. Hey, do these 8 things and you'll feel better. That's just not all of us know that's not the way grief works. And I think for a long time it was, come on, man, like lace up your boots and let's go. Like we just got to battle through it. And now I've learned that sometimes quietness and stillness is the best thing you can give someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. Denette, you have a life verse that God gave to you when you were just a little girl, and it's a scripture that's meaningful to both of us, actually. Talk about what that verse has meant to you in the aftermath of Logan's homegoing.
Yeah, I actually, I'm going to be honest, I don't really know why God had me pick that verse. I was given an assignment, and I went to a private Christian school, and we had to come up with, a verse that was going to be like our life verse. I think if I look back and I'm 100% honest, I didn't want to pick one that everybody else was going to pick. I knew all the life verses, and so it's like,
Right.
man, everyone's going to pick, Jeremiah 29:11, or they're going to pick this, or they're going to pick that. And so I went and I started doing research and studying, and somewhere along the way, I stumbled on Nahum 1:7. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and He knows those who trust in Him. And it just resonated with me, and so that became my life verse. And I put it on everything and all the things. And I think what was so hard for me in the aftermath of Logan going home was realizing, okay, God, your word, this verse you've had me declaring over my life, my whole life, says that you know those that trust in you. You knew that I trusted you, and yet you still allowed. And so at first, if I'm being honest, Jill, I wasn't real happy about it. It wasn't like a yay, okay, that really is going to help me out. It made me very angry. I was really ticked at God, and I'm like, you knew that I would trust you. You knew that I would literally fight through hell to end up making the promises that you've spoken over my life still come to fruition, that I would still fight to trust you. So you've got to make good on your promises now. And so it's kind of it's like a both and. It's twofold, which I think I'm learning over and over again and walking alongside grief. It's both and. It's yes, God is still good, and yes, He knows that I trust Him, but I also still have to carry this and make it matter, make it count, and walk it out well. And often I want to fully believe that God's promises and provision negate the but. It's this and this. He's good and He's holy, and I get my answers prayered, and my son is still here.
Mm-hmm.
But I still have to carry this other side and realize that
That's right.
how do I walk with the both and He is faithful to meet us and not rush us. And yes, His promises are true, but He also doesn't need our fake smiles and our masks and our hands lifted high. He's fine with a holy reverence and our hands just barely open. He's fine with whatever posture we can come to Him with. And I think so often when we think of someone grieving or we see someone in a dark moment, we feel like until they come fully out of that moment, or till they can fully be filled with who they were before the accident, they're not walking with the strength of the Lord. And I know now that's not true. I know fully that that's not true. It's the both and. We can walk and have good days with our heads and hands raised high, and we can have days where we're bowed low and we're weeping, and he's the same in both. And he doesn't rush us from one to the other, or look down on us when we are in those really low days. And so for that, I'm thankful.
Yeah, that's good. I love the both and, because that's where we live as bereaved parents, in the both and. So thank you for that. Logan had spoken to his youth group on the Sunday right before he went to heaven. What was his topic? Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah. He had actually been helping. His mentor at the time was the youth minister over middle school. And he was, gosh, he loved him so much. And he had entrusted him with this last service of the year, kind of before they left from middle school to go to high school, to give them an encouraging word from a senior. And so he had shared about how, if he had to do it over again, he would have pursued Christ earlier, that he would have wished that he would have lived a life fuller at an earlier age, that he wouldn't have been scared of what others thought of him, and that he would have been able to fully use all the things, the good and the bad, his health stuff, his struggles with certain teams that he was on. He used all these different analogies. And then he talked about the hope of heaven. And he literally used an analogy, which I'll never, ever forget. And his mentor had helped him find the images. He used an analogy of what actual angels look like in the Word. And he pulled up pictures, like, what if this angel with all of these eyes and these rings of fire and whatever was to appear right in front of you? You would be fearful, you would be, scared, but yet you would be overwhelmed by the majesty and the craziness of it. And so he had used that analogy of, what would we do if we were face to face with our reality of heaven? And he's like, it would change how we walked. And we had no idea that the very next day he would be face to face with the reality of heaven.
Yeah, God gave us two promises with Logan when you pray over your kids, and it was that he would preach the gospel and that his life would change lives. It's like, as parents, those are kind of the things we like. Let's hang on to that. And little did we know that he would preach the gospel one time publicly to an audience, but in the last, well, even before the accident, but since the accident, his life has changed countless lives. So we stand that God was faithful to his promise. His bereaved parents, we just saw it different than that. It wasn't supposed to look like that. But yeah, he was about the Lord. And it was crazy. One of the stories that I love to share about him, and just is like his preaching, because sermons go further than just standing behind a pulpit. And when we had to, every parent knows, like, you've got to go in now and clean the room of a child that thought he was coming home.
Yeah.
And so it took us months to even do that. Like, it just sat, doors closed. We didn't know what was living in that room and didn't really care. We just left it. And then at one point we finally prayed and got up enough strength to go in there together one day. And man, I remember, like, just cleaning everything out and finding 6 letters that now hang on the wall that my son had written to the Lord, just talking about, like, the Holy Spirit in his life and thank you for salvation. Like, these deep, deep letters that he wrote to his father. It's like, man, like, that's the stuff that preaches far, far beyond maybe the years that you walked. It's crazy. So he was about it, and he got the last message. He got to preach about heaven. I think he had no idea it would be so close.
Yeah, that's right. You've got a lot of unanswered questions in your story, and we talked about that a little bit ago. Questions that you will probably never have the answers to regarding what happened at the pond that night. How are you dealing with that?
I think for me, there are questions that in the grand scheme of things, like in the overarching, I've had to categorize them as they don't matter one way or another. I don't
Right.
know. They have video of my son and his girlfriend driving, windows down, slow. They left here in a great mood, and 35 minutes later, they were at the bottom of a pond. I don't know. I don't know why and how, but if I lived every day having to know that answer, there's this gap that I constantly am chasing information that maybe I grab onto something and I hold on to that tight for a month, and then I realize, well, it can't be that, and then I grab something else, and I have to just categorize it like a bad thing happened. And though I won't
Mm.
know all the details, I know what God's word says. And everyone has a day that they will meet the Lord. And though this one came way earlier than I would like, way earlier than I desired, way earlier than I ever prayed for, I don't know. God knows the whole parade. I only see the float that's right in front of me. So, I have to just, and that's where I have found my like, okay, if I don't have to know all the answers, and I know, look, my son loved the Lord. I know the Lord's character is good and faithful. Okay, well, those are things that I know. I can hold those, and they're not going to be movable, and they don't move with feelings and our emotions and how comes and what abouts, and I have to chalk it up to, as much as my soul, like, there for 24, 48, 72 hours, I was trying to figure out like how in the, like, I don't even understand any of this, but I'll never forget, I went back to the pond that it happened in a day or two later. And I had gone back with just this whole thought process of, the last time I was at that pond, it took something from me. And I wanted to go regain it back so that that pond didn't own me for the rest
Mm.
of my days. And so I remember
Yeah.
just sitting on that bank and worshiping, like, you know, I don't know, but it gave me like this closure to go, I don't have to know. Like, I don't need to know all the whys and how it comes, because that would only open up a plethora of other questions. So
That's right.
I feel like there's no end in sight if I just start trying to go down that. So I stand on what I know, and that's God is good. He is faithful. My son loved him. And so one day, every day, I'm one day closer.
I do think though, those first few days, I think that's a normal thing. You want to know all the answers.
Sure.
For me, I definitely probably looked into too much and asked too many questions, and I couldn't let go of the fact that, man, did I miss something?
Mm.
There's
Yeah.
there's some way, as a mother or as a parent, that I missed something that would have protected him, protected our family, protected our other children. And so I think in the beginning stages,
Mm.
those questions are very common. When I think back on that question, and again, we're only 2.5 years removed. When I think back on all the details, I can very quickly put myself back right in that moment. And yet I can see how far now that I've come. And I think at the beginning, those questions matter so much,
Mm.
as if they'll fix anything, and they won't. But now, a couple years later, I realize those answers to those questions I was searching for so desperately really wouldn't have done anything to change my grief, wouldn't have fixed anything. And so, if there was someone watching that is in the early stages of grief, I would say those questions that are so all encompassing, and all of those things, they're normal, and yet they will start to get easier
Yeah.
with time. Even though that seems impossible, it really does get a little easier with time, and you realize that at the end of the day, it just doesn't matter.
And it's a process, like, and this, because I think so many times we can emotionally bypass, or we can spiritually bypass truth and reality and pretend like things didn't happen, or we don't want to know. And so we put up these blinders. But any of that stuff that we do stunts and blocks us moving forward in whatever time frame that looks like, because people's time frames are all over the map. Some are phenomenal at it. Some are a little slower in that process.
Yeah.
So it's like, all that we encourage people now, because you know how it is now, everybody who loses anybody gets told to call you because you lost a child. And so now all of a sudden you become overnight the expert of what to do.
Right.
Which we don't even take those, honestly. At this point, we're still trying to figure it out ourselves. But, it's
Sure.
like what we tell them is at least sit and you got to get with the Lord, and don't just bypass, don't void or nullify or try to just abolish the emotion. You got to deal with it. You got to deal with it in a healthy way. But it's awful.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that. It's a tough situation, I know. But you giving that little bit of hope that it does get better, and the reminder that those questions don't really matter. The answer to those questions, we'll get them in time when we get to heaven one day. And at that point, it's not going to matter anymore. This concludes the first half of my conversation with Kurt and Denette Schaer. Be sure to come back next week as we get deeper into their story and they talk about how God has been working in their lives since Logan went to heaven ahead of them. Thanks again for listening, and I'll look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday.